Hey everyone. Well. I've had a string of thoughts over the last couple of days. I feel like I've been building on a set of ideas, I guess, that came through the other day while I was reading Chögyam Trungpa's book, The Sacred Path of a Warrior. I did a post a couple days ago where he talked about magic, this concept of magic in the sense of being a kind of spiritual harnessing of our energy, of our deepest power. And it's he defines magic in this beautiful way as a kind of what happens when our inner wisdom meets the world as it is. It's just beautifully articulated. And I love that idea of magic. And of course this is then contrasted with the idea of magic as being something that is a deception, deceiving the senses, which is often how magic gets defined in sort of common in our everyday culture. And so I love this other look at it. One of the things he says is in order to do this, in order to be able to harness magic in this way, the kind of magic that we experience when we experience a synchronicity, something that the odds, the normal explanations, the laws of physics shouldn't be able to explain. So what he says is there's no way to harness this magic unless we rid ourselves, clear ourselves of deception, of self-deception. So this is kind of what I was talking about in my post yesterday with this idea that, I can be meditating, ostensibly meditating, but if my mind is just running a pattern, I'm sort of not really meditating. I'm there, and I may come into awareness here and there, but if I'm running that pattern, then I'm kind of not in awareness, and to that extent, I'm deceiving myself. I'm actually not. I'm pretending something that is unreal is real. I'm convinced. I'm allowing myself to be seduced by the mind into believing that something is real when it's not. So building on this idea, what comes to me, it has been coming to me over the last day or so, is a related idea from Chögyam Trungpa's work, which is at some point in the last chapter or two that I've been reading, he says something along the lines of, in order to harness this magic, in order to be in this space of total power, it's total vulnerability, but also total power, we need to be in a place of total of kind of gentleness and non-aggression, non-aggressiveness. And which makes total sense if you think about it, because where does aggression come from? Aggression comes from the survival instinct. That's where it comes from. It's the impulse to either dominate or claim, take something, take what we need. It's the impulse to survive at the expense of something else, someone else, something else. That's sort of aggression most fundamentally defined in the sort of most abstract definition of it. And then the sort of like linchpin insight that he shares is that aggression comes from habitual thought. which again makes sense, because if you think about how habitual thought is a pattern of entrenched behavior. It's a pattern of behavior or action or thinking that we have become attached to. And when that gets challenged, it responds by defending itself. It's inherently, something that's entrenched and something that's habitual is inherently not responsive to the environment. It's inherently sort of like, it's almost like a train driving with no conductor, right? Or with no pilot, no driver. And it's just going, and it's gonna keep going because no one's, it's on a track, and no one's determined, no one's making any decisions about where it's going. It's just going. So not only is that going to inherently bump up against the universe in a way that causes friction, because it's not going to be responsive to the moment, it's going to just go and do its thing no matter what. But also, if you challenge that, now if we take the train metaphor away for a minute, just think about our thinking, sort of this entrenched habitual pattern of thinking. What happens when we challenge that? Well, it generally flares up and tries to defend itself. It doesn't generally say, "Oh my God, yes, you're so right, absolutely, of course. I don't see how I could have been so attached to myself." That's not what the mind does. The mind inherently tries to defend its habituated patterns. Why? Because it has determined that they are the basis of our survival. It has learned that these ways of doing things lead to survival versus alternatives. But I thought that was a fascinating connection. The notion that aggression is not, it almost takes aggression and explains it it gives it a perfect explanation where there's no further explanation is necessary. And we haven't touched on a moral edict or a moral imperative. We haven't judged anything. We haven't said anything is right or wrong, or we haven't said aggression is right or wrong. We've just linked aggression to an underlying phenomenon, which is entrenched thought, habitual thought. So this comes around full circle to the realization that if we want to let go, if we want to relinquish our aggression, we have to relinquish our habitual thought. We have to disidentify from those thoughts that are just patterns, that are programmed, and that don't give, that don't have the capacity to stop and be in response, because they are autopilot programs. I found that fascinating. I found that was a link that I had never made. It's not, it's on some level it makes sense. It's like, yeah, I can see that. But on another level, the fact that aggression and the fact that this stance towards the world, which is inherently kind of defensive, aggressive, it's like proactively defensive. Aggression is proactive defensiveness. Best defense is a good offense. That philosophy, on the soul level. The notion that is emanating from something as simple as our entrenched thoughts is remarkable to me. Now, that doesn't mean that it's simple to solve the problem, but it means that there's an incredibly elegant and, it's almost like the Occam's razor explanation for where aggression comes from. Occam's razor being the scientific principle that among a multitude of explanations, the simplest explanation is generally the correct one. I find that this a remarkably simple and elegant explanation for where aggression comes from. And it also, of course, brings us right back full circle to why we meditate, what we're doing when we meditate, why we may have noticed inherently when we meditate, if we start logging hours in the space of identifying with a part of ourselves that is not the mind, because the mind can actually only ever be habitual. That's not really true. It can filter insights. It can be animated by source, by spirit, by energy, in a way that something new is actually kind of effulging through the mind or out of the mind. But by and large, the mind is it's like a knife. It's a tool. It's a tool for doing certain things, and it doesn't do other things. The mind does not bring us to presence. The mind does not discover the source of everything. The mind doesn't discover consciousness. The mind falls within consciousness. It's smaller than consciousness. It's looking. If the mind is an inward-facing bubble, consciousness is beyond the mind. So the mind is never going, oh, look at that. Oh, consciousness, I see. The mind literally can't do that. Consciousness can look at the mind, but the mind can't do the reverse. So in meditation, when we're logging time in no time, no space, these paradoxical things that we experience when we begin these practices, and especially when we begin to sort of have some insights come through via these practices. Meditation is the gradual dismantling of these habitual forms of thought. It's like it's dissolving them. Consciousness we get a chance to, like, instead of being fixed in that bubble of the mind where everything is kind of self-perpetuating and it's all circular, it's all within, we transport our identity. We transport the locus of our attention to the sort of zone around the manifest mind. And now we can start to dissolve what's there. And we can reprogram the mind. We can take programs that aren't really working for us and reprogram. Now, those new programs may also become habitual at some point and have to be outgrown, have to be relinquished. But at least now we can choose what they are. We can decide this program that I'm attached to is no longer working. I'm gonna recognize that my survival is not contingent upon this program. Let it go. Ooh, that feels. Ooh, okay, feeling a little vulnerable now. What would be a more effective way? Maybe this. A new proposal comes, and maybe an insight comes through. Maybe our inherent wisdom meets the state of things as they are because we're not running a program, and magic is able to happen. Right? That's the phenomena. That's the sort of like mind-blowing crux of all this. And it's also, I think, why I'm finding this particular explanation of aggression, this particular definition of aggression, so spectacularly powerful, and so just, what a cool insight. What an amazing thing to have connected. And what a useful way of thinking about it. It means anytime we're experiencing that feeling of aggression, anytime we have that I'm going to war with the world feeling, we don't have to judge it morally and say, oh, I really shouldn't be going to war with the world. God, I'm such an idiot for going to war with the world. Why am I so mad? Yeah, it's like the judgment of aggression, or the judgment of virtually anything, almost never alleviates it. It just maybe sends it underground, sends it into the subconscious. We judge it, so it's like, oh shit, now I'm not supposed to be aggressive, so I'll be passive aggressive, right? No, let's understand the mechanics of aggression and massage the knots out, right? Let the mind, let ourselves disidentify from these patterns and see what comes through then. How we can employ the mind in a new way once we recognize that we're not this pattern, you know. Anyway, that's where I'm at today, people. I am so inspired by virtually every word out of Chögyam Trungpa's mouth, but also just by being in this process and witnessing these kind of waves of insight that are coming through. So, thanks so much for watching. Love you, appreciate you beyond what I can say. Have a wonderful day.